Okay, we'll just wait a moment. It's just the streaming's coming in here now. Okay, looks like we are good to kick off. So let me just go to our slides. Hey, hi everyone. So we'll just wait a moment. It's just the streaming's coming in here now. Okay, looks like we are good to kick off. So let me just go to our slides. All right. Apologies, everyone. Just a few technical glitches there, but we're good to get going now. Welcome, everybody, to our Singapore webinar, Climate Disclosure and Assurance in Singapore. So I'm your moderator, Joe. I run Unitive Impact, and we're looking forward to having you in partnership with Foo Kon Tan and Sustainable SG today to have this informative and interactive webinar. So thank you for taking the time to register and join us. So as I said, I'm moderating our discussion today, and we have Keng Chong from Foo Kon Tan, who is the partner in business risk, and also 𝗬𝗓𝗪𝗽, who is a director of business risk at Foo Kon Tan. And then also we have 𝗕𝗵𝘁, who is the founder and principal consultant at Sustainable SG. So welcome to you all. Keng Chong, I'll be referring to for short as KC going forward. So welcome each to you, and thank you for taking the time with us today. So let's just talk a little bit about house rules. So we are recording this session, so you will receive a replay link after the event, and please feel free on YouTube Live there to use the live chat. We have our team there ready to capture your questions. So drop any questions that you might have in, or any comments or reactions at any time. Incrementally through the session, we will be launching some live polls in the chat during the session there. I encourage you to respond to those. Always interested in everyone's perspectives there. It is going to be interactive, so there will be Q&A at the end, but feel free to ask questions throughout, and we will pause to check which questions have come through. We'll also share a free resources and downloads page after the session, and all of that will be shared in the chat. If you do need any support during the session, do reach out on chat, or you can email us at info@unitiveimpact.com. So with that, let's dive into it. So with webinars, there can be lots of information that you can cover, and we didn't want to be reading lots of slides. We wanted to make it interactive and practical for you. So hopefully by the end of this session, you will walk away with key takeaways really around climate reporting being now mandatory from a number of organizations, and that's expanding. So we'll talk a little bit about the Singaporean requirements in that space and how that relates to some of the international standards. We'll talk a lot about assurance and how to be ready for that, starting with limited assurance and eventually moving to reasonable assurance. And while that's important for compliance and also board and investor confidence there as well. And we'll also touch on getting ready for climate reporting, and looking at climate reporting, carbon accounting, and how there's different ways that you can automate and simplify that, make that a little bit more stress-free and streamlined. So they're the three key areas we'll be diving into today. And we'll start a little bit just at a macro level, just talking a little bit about sustainability standards, because I don't want to assume that everybody is across these. And so essentially, we have had this global move where the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, has released what we call IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards S1 and S2. So you'll hear those referred to in the webinar, and by and large, they have incorporated historical aspects of TCFD, SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Boards, CDP, and GRI. So some of you may already be familiar with those if you've worked in this space. But we're seeing an alignment in the market of these standards. So I wanted to open up the discussion and maybe start with 𝗬𝗓𝗪. Maybe if you can walk us through, 𝗬𝗓𝗪, some of your insights around how IFRS S2 is being applied in Singapore, and which companies are affected, now and upcoming.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So I think in Singapore, basically the climate reporting and assurance roadmap, right, since, February 24, between 𝗏𝗏 and SGX, I think they have come up, with a timeline, right? So essentially, from 2025, FY25 onwards, for listed companies, they have to do mandatory ISSB aligned climate-related disclosures. So essentially that's, for scope 1 and 2. Right, so those are for listed companies, starting FY 2025, and then come 2026, right? That will expand to scope 3. Okay, that's for listed companies as well. And then, thereon 2027, that's where the external limited assurance on scope 1 and 2 will kick in. Right, so that is the roadmap for listed companies. Of course, there are those large non-listed companies. So what we mean by that, as defined in the roadmap, would be those companies that have an annual revenue of at least 1 billion, and okay, I must stress is and total assets of at least 500 million. Right, so this group is categorized as large non-listed companies, and for them the roadmap would be slightly later, but still coming. So in FY 2027, they need to do mandatory ISSB aligned climate-related disclosures. So that's scope 1 and 2. Thereafter, for scope 3, no earlier than FY 2029. Okay, and then of course the assurance will kick in for them as well. So the external limited assurance on scope 1 and 2 would also kick in for them, in FY 2029. So this is the other group, of the large, what we call the large non-listed companies. So the listed companies will go first, and thereafter will come the large non-listed companies. So not much work on, the rest of the companies, for example, the SMEs, the charities, not as of now, but we believe, they in due time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Thanks, Elizabeth. There will probably touch on a little bit around, is it worth, later on in discussion, is it worth SMEs and other companies that don't fall into the mandatory categories to start this journey, because there's a little bit to get your head around. So that's good. KC, what are you seeing in the work that you're doing at Foo Kon Tan there around how directors and finance leaders are approaching the new requirements?
Thank you, Joe. So I think maybe I'll talk a little bit about the ESG maturity roadmap first. So in implementing ESG, there are 2 phases. First, you look at ESG integration and then ESG transformation. So for ESG integration, we are looking at more on the compliance and risk management. So it's really for companies to stay abreast of ESG reporting standards and frameworks so as to support business operations. And then at the same time, for risk management, to be able to identify risk and opportunities that may affect the financial performance. So this will be more on the integration part. So traditionally, it's just finance and accounting reporting, but now there's an ESG part coming in, which management has to integrate in their daily operations. Then we have the second phase that is for more matured companies, where we are looking at ESG transformation, which involves embedding ESG in the company's strategy and decision making. Of course, this would be higher up the value chain in terms of adding value to business, enhancing business performance. Right. So going back to the integration part, which what we are seeing most of our clients or even the SME listed companies in Singapore, they are more at this stage currently at the compliance phase. Of course, given the new requirements over the last 5 to 7 years, starting with GRI back in 7 years, I mean, or more of just SR reporting, or most companies adopted GRI. And then about 2 years ago, we had TCFD being implemented, being launched, right? And then we currently are looking at S1 and S2. So I think most companies have been really getting themselves ready, given a lot of the short lead time in getting ready for these reporting requirements. And as of now, what we're seeing is that most companies or clients are still relying a lot on consultants, ESG consultants, to help them, understand what are the requirements and then implement the reporting requirements, and some to the extent of even getting consultants to draft policies for them and things like that. So that is the current stage, I think, where most companies, the directors and finance leaders are at, I would say. And of course, as we evolve, definitely, I think we'll be seeing more value that these companies can actually, achieve through adopting ESG.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, KC. 𝗬𝗏, as the KC was talking there, sometimes if you're new to this, you can get a little bit confused between S1 and S2, and yeah, I think it's important to highlight to people that are listening that really the mandatory aspects are focused on S2 at the moment in Singapore, but in context there, the other areas are, governance, risk management, scenario analysis, and strategy, but it's really the metrics and targets piece that's falling under the current remit there. Do you have any comments there around that you wanted to add around what Elizabeth and KC have shared? And I'm also interested in, because you also work with a broad range of clients, but what you're seeing SMEs or charities or other suppliers thinking about in regards to all of this.
Yeah, I would say that well, as far as the SMEs are concerned, the good news is that they are not required to do reporting for now, right? So, but that said, at the end of the day, the SMEs are also suppliers and vendors to the large organizations. Yeah. So then because of all these reporting requirements, so the level of knowledge required to comply, to internalize, to delve into your business, that has actually gone up quite significantly. And then what we're seeing in the market is that a lot of the larger organizations are also asking their suppliers and players in the supply chain to provide ESG related information. And then another very increasingly popular market practice is really getting the suppliers to sign off a certain code of conduct, right? And then they're also evolving standards like 𝗕𝗂𝗶𝗺, so which actually is in a way, one of the things that they do is to do supplier certification. So we're seeing all these things happening in the market. So essentially, for SMEs, they cannot kind of bury their heads in the sand, right? So they need to know what's going on. And then if they want to be competitive, they want to continue to supply to their major corporates, then they certainly need to understand some of these newer climate reporting and greenhouse gas accounting standards. Yeah. So I guess the other point is also that regardless of the size of your company, climate change is here, right? So if you look at this summer, for instance, in the Northern Hemisphere, the number of extreme weather events has kind of reached an all-time high, right? And there's been quite massive physical impacts and losses, including loss of life. So that's why the world is changing, and all the more so. Regardless of the size, companies must understand and analyze how they will be impacted, right? So because as the saying goes, right, this summer might be the coolest summer in our lives, right? If let's say in a worst case scenario, we can't get our act together, and climate change kind of becomes a bit of a runaway train, right? Then in which case we just have to be prepared for a warming and hostile world, right? So essentially, extreme weather, climate change, global warming will impact all organizations directly or indirectly. So then, and really for us in running our own businesses, or if we work for somebody or we are custodians of certain organizations, then it's really part and parcel of running a business or being responsible, that we need to understand climate change and respond to it accordingly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we'll explore that a little bit later in the webinar. I think there's, organizations that have that sense of their social responsibility, but then a part of that is then, making sure that we're making those considerations around our climate responsibilities. But it's not just about the responsibility, it's also just the scenarios of what business will be like and the impacts of operating your businesses under those, changed conditions. So yeah, good insights there. I'll jump ahead here to this, which is some of the common disclosure steps that a client would typically go through. And, right through starting from scoping and readiness and, getting that baseline data in place, planning their decarbonisation approach and strategy and moving to reporting. And then we'll talk a little bit more, as I said, about assurance later. It is important to stress, I think, that this is a journey as well. So, if organizations and teams are looking at this as something that's just a one-off and, done and dusted, that's probably not the best way to think about it. It's more to do with how do we start the conversation, start the work, do the dry runs, do the testing, but then look at maturing our, approach year on year. An open question to the panel here, no particular person there. Is there any observations or things that you've seen within your client base that relates to how people are approaching their disclosure steps, or any insights you'd like to share? What do you think? Do you think wait and see is a good approach for the people that fit into the voluntary category? Or is it, what would be some practical, simple things that they could do that would build reporting and assurance readiness without necessarily having to go through the whole journey? What would be some ideas there?
Okay. I think the wait and see kind of situation, it should be getting better over time, given that companies have been trying to catch up with the more demanding reporting standards, as I said, from GRI to TCFD, right, and then now to S1 and S2. So and in fact, as when TCFD was being implemented 2 years ago, and even as of now, many companies are still not really fully compliant with TCFD, right? I mean, and just before they could get ready, we have the more demanding standards coming with S1 and S2. So I think, and many companies know that ESG is here to stay, and that it's no longer like just financial reporting or even just pure compliance. So they are all stepping up, and we can see that some companies are actually hiring dedicated ESG reporting personnel to help them better keep up with the requirements. So yeah, I mean, we are seeing a trend of companies giving more focus in terms of resources and competencies, so that they can really adjust themselves and adopt, as I said, integrate GST into their daily operations going forward.
Yeah, maybe if I just have a short comment, which is that I think it's companies shouldn't wait and see, because it's actually quite easy to get started, right? So because there are a lot of resources available. Of course, as Casey mentioned earlier, you can turn to consultants, but if you look at some of the NGOs, including some of the government websites out there, so there are also free, simple Scope 1 and Scope 2 calculators available. So it's good to get started, because also bear in mind that as far as smaller companies are concerned, your Scope 1 and Scope 2, right, are actually your customer Scope 3 emissions. Yeah, so it's actually good to get started and just understand, familiarize yourself with the lingo, with things like emission scope, with defining your boundaries and so on, right? And then also along the way, it also, because Scope 2, for instance, emissions come from mainly purchased electricity in Singapore's context. And then if you go through the exercise, it's also an opportunity to think about how you might want to optimize your electricity usage. Yeah. So, and in doing so, it's also actually not only good for the environment, it's good for business as well, because you might end up reducing and your operating costs.
Yeah. So, where our business operates, in a number of different markets, I find it interesting, that the Singapore government and the relevant agencies in Singapore have a very pragmatic approach, I think, to implementing the reporting. So I don't feel like it's over the top in terms of going, for S1 and S2 all at once and making, quite a broad group there as some other countries might. And so I think there's a lot of that support for pro-business. They're trying to make this adaptable and practical, but then also manageable as well to transition into, some of these requirements there. What about the climate report there? These are the kind of core elements for directors. So maybe Elizabeth and 𝗕𝘂, you might want to sort of comment to that, in terms of directors' responsibilities if they are falling under a mandatory part of their reporting requirements. So we've got obviously the climate statement that needs to be built. Why is the director's declaration important from a risk perspective? What are some of the considerations for directors here that may not have done this? Maybe they've been signing off on financial disclosures, all of their professional life, but this is the first time that they're having to sign off on non-financial disclosures. What are the thoughts there?
Right. So, yeah, I think the director's statement on, this thing in the past, we call that the sustainability report, the board statement, right, under the listing requirements. So it's mandatory for listed companies to have the board give the statement on their commitment to ESG and sustainability reporting, right? So that is kind of required for listed companies. Of course, I think going forward, if you look at S1 and S2, there are more disclosure requirements. And at the end of the day, what we are looking at, or what the regulations or frameworks are looking at, is for companies to set the tone at the top, right? So even for S1 and S2, you can look at under the governance pillar, where companies will have to disclose the governing board that provides oversight in terms of climate-related risk and opportunities. And the board even has to demonstrate the availability of competencies and resources to oversee the strategies that are designed to manage climate risk and opportunities. So it's becoming a lot more prescriptive in terms of what companies need to do to set the tone. And I think that standards, I think the advantage of that is that it will give the governing board or the directors more support for them to provide a more assertive statement on climate reporting.
Yeah, it's important, isn't it? It's not just the management layer, it's also that board considerations in terms of the statements that they need to prepare for. 𝗕𝗏, do you have anything to add there? I know you and your team have involved in a lot of report preparation.
Yeah, so I totally agree with 𝗕𝘂. The requirements are getting more prescriptive, but I feel that there's also a silver lining, which is that it creates an environment where companies would really, the best way to handle these reporting and compliance requirements is really to integrate it with many of your existing policies and practices. And one thing we observe is that a lot of, because even before the IFRS requirements were rolled out in Singapore, so most companies would have certain enterprise risk management policies and systems in place, right? So then now of course, companies are required under the IFRS requirements to be a lot more careful about and as well as prescriptive in identifying and managing their climate-related risks. So then instead of tackling this as a separate initiative altogether, then what makes a lot of sense is really to integrate this with your existing enterprise risk management systems and processes, right? And even at a very practical level, it's a lot easier to schedule one meeting to discuss two things, right? Than to form two committees and schedule two meetings to discuss the two things. Yeah, so that's something that we are seeing, right? And it's a good thing, right? Because at the end of the day, what we hope to see, right, is really for companies to internalize everything about climate change, right? And internalize it and really incorporate it into their corporate strategy and their operations.
Yeah, that's very practical guidance. Thank you, 𝗦𝗶. Let's move on to a discussion around assurance. So just in terms of the terms around assurance, what you'll become familiar with, if you're not familiar already, is two prime levels of assurance where you have limited assurance and then reasonable assurance. So in the mandatory reporting regime for large listed SGX custom companies in Singapore at the moment, this is currently at limited assurance, but as we build capability, as we build maturity, then that will likely move to reasonable levels of assurance, which requires increased verification there. So 𝗬𝗓, I was wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit more around what limited assurance means in the Singaporean context and what companies might need to have in place.
Okay, so for limited, sorry. Okay, for limited assurance, I mean, typically, just by the name itself, there's obviously, the procedures, that we carry out in order, to have a limited assurance. So usually this typically, is through inquiry or analytical, right? So, whereas reasonable, there are a lot more, detailed evidence gathering and, corroboration that we need to do, before we reach an opinion, right? So, I mean, there are obviously advantages and limitations, So in Singapore, I mean, obviously we start off with limited assurance, right? Just as a starting point for everyone. So, of course, the advantages of a limited assurance is that, it's less time consuming, right? Because, the procedures that we undertake are, simpler, just analytical in nature, right? And then, obviously, maybe more cost effective in a way. Maybe you don't need that many resources, and the client does not need to give you too much of their time. So in that way, it could be an advantage, right? It's also suitable for entities where their control systems are not yet mature enough, to undertake a reasonable assurance, right? Or maybe there's a lower risk of material misstatement where in our view, or maybe in management's view, I have quite robust system in place, hence we can go about the limited assurance, right? Of course, the good thing is that, or rather to certain stakeholders, is that it provides a basic level of assurance without too much of extensive work, right? And compared to a full audit. So these are some of the advantages of limited assurance. Of course, on the flip side, there could be limitations. So because the procedures are less detailed, right? It could be less thorough, in a way may seem to be less thorough, and maybe we may not detect all kinds of material misstatements. Of course, to stakeholders, right? Maybe it could result in a lower degree of confidence, right? Because it's just limited assurance, right? Versus a reasonable assurance, and in a way, it may not satisfy investor requirements. Maybe they're looking for something more solid, deeper. So it may not go too well, in terms of limited assurance. So, but of course, in time to come, as we said, we might move to reasonable assurance. So as a starting point, and now that everyone is trying to grapple with S1 and 2, I think it's good maybe start off with limited, and then thereafter the requirements could get heavier, right? And then we could move on to reasonable assurance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, 𝗬𝗓. So, Casey, what else are you seeing from clients there, to build on what 𝗬𝗓 was saying, in terms of maybe gaps or opportunities when it comes to assurance readiness? Is there any insights or themes that you're seeing, or trends?
Right. Okay. I would look at it from maybe two perspectives, in terms of maybe the governance component of the S1 and S2. So as I mentioned earlier on the need for board and or even the audit and risk committees to really assess whether they have the adequate competencies to oversee climate risk and opportunities and the impact on strategies. All right. So I think this is something that most companies, although some have appointed some dedicated ESG person to look after it. I think the understanding on the requirement of the top management to have the competency and to be putting in place the governance procedures, internal controls, and SOPs to manage climate-related risk and opportunities. It's still not really robust enough, right? So in terms of a lot of delegation of the responsibilities to that person or even to finance. So I think and if I were to then look at it from the strategy point of view, right? And the spirit of S1 and S2, or at the end of the day, or the even the other ESG standards is really on embracing ESG, right? Really to of course for the good of the planet in terms of climate, and at the end of the day to also help your business to evolve and to find new opportunities such that you can also grow the business at the same time, reduce production costs or even stabilize your logistics and supply chain costs. So I think at the end of the day, it involves a strategy and the business model and how you can actually leverage on ESG to help you at the same time while being socially responsible and looking after the planet and to prevent any or even to the extent of greenwashing. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in this area where corporates should do more rather than just looking at it as a necessary evil for compliance purposes.
Yeah. One of the things I, heard in what you were sort of sharing there as well, while it's can be good to have an ESG team or a representative and maybe even rely on consultants is, don't outsource all of the thinking. You have to build that capability at the director and the board level. Otherwise, it will increase risk, especially as you're, being responsible for those signing off on those disclosures. But then if we think more long term, without that capability or that level of thinking, then it's a little bit harder to maybe think about your business in the context of a changing world, changing regulatory landscape, changing environmental landscape. And so I think those are all key things that boards need to think and management teams when it comes to strategy, because they know their business is best, right? Not the consultant, right? So this is that balancing act between not outsourcing all of it as a problem to go away, but something to really start to work through. So that was a really interesting point. So, and you started to touch there on, compliance, maybe shifting that as an opportunity for growth. And for a lot of organizations, that can be a little bit like what we might call the elephant in the room, where compliance can feel like, on one hand, this burden, that, you have to do this. But I think there's an opportunity to reframe this. So, there's a few benefits up here, but 𝗏𝗏, with working with your client base, what are they seeing, in terms of benefits that are real to their business, not just having to tick the box, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say that when it comes to carbon management and reporting, there are two parts to it, right? So to use a football metaphor, is defensive, right? So because it's really about compliance and as the bar or rather as the floor goes up, so then we are reaching a point where you need to be conversant, you need to be compliant just to be able to play, right? So it's defensive. But I guess what's important is also companies should also take a strategic view, right? So because in many sectors, this thing about managing your climate risk, right, can be a differentiating factor, right? So in terms of, say, as far as your investors are concerned, as far as your, let's say if you are bidding for a certain big project, and how the owner of the project, because they also want to manage their own risks, right? So
Yeah.
then they will be looking at your ESG and climate reporting records and so on, right? So it's something offensive. And the other thing I've also noticed is that because there's also this whole world about carbon offsets. Yeah,
Mm.
and I would say in recent months, I've been meeting fairly interesting businesses. So who are, they see this as a potential revenue generator, right? So that means, so these companies could be, say, in palm oil, could be, say, looking at alternative fuels for their companies, right? So they're interested in knowing how, if they transition, right, to these greener alternatives, how can they go about securitizing this transition into offsets, right, which then creates a new revenue stream. Yeah, so these are just some of the really exciting things that are happening, right? I totally agree with Joe. I think it shouldn't really carbon. It shouldn't be just a check the box compliance exercise, right? So it's really a lot more than that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it is really interesting, isn't it, to see how this is creating new market and business model opportunities as well. That's exciting. Yeah, so there's, this is some of the benefits for compliance, especially for larger organizations, SMEs, again, like you've mentioned, I think, 𝗏𝗏 and in previous, part of the conversation there around that supply chain participation. And we're seeing that a lot as well, where, our clients are coming saying, we've been working a little bit on this, but we haven't really created targets, and now we're trying to go for contracts with the government, and then they're asking us what our, footprint is and what our target reduction targets are, etc. So it's important. Casey and Elizabeth, are you seeing anything else that you would add to this around the benefits that we might not have already touched on?
Well, I think in terms of the benefits, of course, beyond just compliance, um, well, I mean, you could actually leverage on ESG to be more competitive, increasing your competitive edge, right? So, for example, if there are opportunities for you to develop a new product that is more carbon friendly, right? And of course, that would attract the so-called more eco-conscious consumers, and I mean, you could have a lot more business opportunities, right? Versus just sticking with what you have currently. So it's about also knowing the consumers' preferences, and also the society moving towards more ESG conscious products and services.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also mentioned earlier in terms of a more sustainable, profitable organizations through working better with vendors in terms of managing the logistics and supply chain costs. Yeah, I think that these are the other opportunities which you could use ESG to help you accomplish your business objectives and optimizing your financial performance.
Great, great. Just encourage those that are participating in the webinar today, please feel free to respond to the poll questions. I know a lot of you have done already, and post any questions that you might have there as well coming through. In terms of 𝗦𝗏, have you seen any of your clients, working with ESG where it's resulted in reduction of operational costs? And so that's an interesting one because sometimes people just see, the activities here as, this is going to take us time and money, but have you seen any examples there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've worked with some companies that have started looking at the supply chain, right? So they are sourcing for greener products, for example. And then the surprising thing is that, I mean, really depending on the industry you're in. So because the traditional thinking is that greener materials are more expensive, right? So but that's not always the case, right? So because I think that, now, I mean, if you look at, let's say, where we source our construction materials, it can be all over the world, right? And then and increasingly, because as Casey mentioned, because there's a lot more scrutiny on market scrutiny in terms of greener materials. So there are also increasingly products in the market with certain green certifications, right? And so what it means is that let's say as a buyer, if you buying green doesn't always mean things that are more expensive, right? And then and in a way, it also makes your supply chain more resilient, right? Then also, if I may add, particularly in Singapore's context, the government also supports kind of consortium-based initiatives to develop and deploy greener materials and products and services as well, right? So then, in a way, if you tap on some of those grants, right, then it can actually bring down the cost, and then it also allows you to de-risk the whole project and also in a way differentiate yourself in the market. So we're seeing that happening. So although what I would say is that that transition is a little bit uneven, right? So and again, maybe if I can go back to construction because I have a little bit of knowledge of that, right? So then there are also a lot of concerns about, let's say, safety, right, of certain construction materials, right, if you were to transition, right? So that's why I think, as always, we need to accept that there are other considerations that while ESG is certainly important, right? So we need to also balance it off against safety considerations and also against operational considerations and cost considerations as well. Yeah.
Great. Well, we could probably spend lots of time because we all work with our clients to help build the business case around this stuff. But it was just looking at some of the poll results. It's almost 65% of the participants that responded to the poll, their main driver and interest around climate reporting is from regulatory reporting requirement perspective. So I think that maybe that's an encouragement to then, for those individuals and organizations to see how they could maybe look at some of the other angles around competitive advantage and, some of the things that we've talked about. Over 60% of the respondents at the moment, they are just learning about reporting, and the remainder have already started reporting. So it's good to know that we've got some reporters in the audience there. And one of the biggest barriers that the audience is seeing in terms of compliance or assurance is really close to 50% really are saying it's around about the lack of capability inside the organization, which we touched on in the discussion, right? So interesting insights. Thanks everybody for participating and sharing. It's important to also acknowledge some of the challenges, here as we, as you are preparing for reporting and going on that journey. The first being, a lot of manual data capture that's going on at the moment, and information sitting in different systems and spreadsheet here, and this person is the custodian of that data, and this department is the custodian of that. So that's definitely a challenge. 𝗦𝗏, when we were preparing for this webinar, this second one, this was an observation you made, which was the timing mismatch between financial and climate reporting. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so because so this is again another emerging issue, because if you look at the IFRS S2 requirements, it actually asks for a lot of quantification of your climate-related risks and opportunities, including how it impacts your financial statements, your cash flow, your business model, and so on. So my colleagues and I will be in a number of conversations with clients and business partners about how do you reconcile, right, financial reporting and climate reporting. And so I would say that this is actually a relatively new area. So, and one reason being that if you look at, let's say, the time frames that companies generally adopt, right, whether companies in-house or consultants adopt to do the scenario analysis, to do the qualitative and quantitative impacts of climate change, it's usually quite long term, right? 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out even, right? So, and these are really, to a large extent, way beyond commonly used financial timeframes, right? So because if you look at, let's say, the listed companies here in Singapore, they do half-yearly reporting. Of course, they need to publish annual statements and so on, right? So then, so we've been having a few conversations also with our clients in terms of what is the best way to dovetail the two, right? So really from two perspectives. So one is really from an organizational perspective, right? So like if you think that, let's say, the climate impacts are only going to happen in 20 years time, so how does it impact your business now and in the next 2 to 3 years, right? So that's the organization side. And then the second part is really how do you go about doing the reporting, right? Because also bear in mind that your investors, your shareholders are also reading the reports. And then let's say let's say you've done your quantitative risk assessment, it says that something like in 30 years time in an extreme global warming scenario, maybe half your assets could be at risk, right? And then are you going to put that into your sustainability report? Yeah. So these are just some of the, I don't think there's a single model answer for this, but it's actually something that companies have to discuss, right? And then and think through, right? So what are the pros and cons in terms of disclosing, making some of these disclosures? Yeah.
Yeah. As you all know, but we work with 𝗬𝗂𝗀𝗧, and for the fifth one, they're really tackling that issue, which is a challenge, which is the integration between sustainability and financial reporting. And what we're seeing is a trend there for to have that integrated report, but then actually the mechanics of bringing that together can be challenging from an organizational level there as well. So we've talked a bit about number 3 already, which is audit readiness and assurance pressure, and also the audience has highlighted also ESG capability as a key challenge there. And 𝗪𝗪, you talked a little bit there about extending that thinking, so it's not pushing it just to a team, but maybe making sure that the management and the board are thinking about that as well. So carbon accounting is obviously foundational to preparing for this reporting, and it really underpins the compliance to ISSB to S2, especially for your scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions data. And looking at this, what we find in using carbon accounting and doing carbon accounting is, it helps identify those risks to clients where they sit. So perceive, where there's gaps or hotspots or transition risks that they weren't previously aware of or thinking about. But then it's also a core component of sustainability strategy. So helping, with that alignment of operational decisions, and looking at net zero targets. Also, we're seeing for those clients that are then moving in the direction of needing to disclose, then it really helps to have that. And you really need it, obviously, if you're going to go through that assurance readiness part, because you need that transparent, methodologies and documented calculations for that credibility when you're going through the verification purpose side of things. So we've been working a lot, for example, with 𝗪𝗪𝗧, and I know there's lots of tools out there as well. You mentioned the free tools, especially for the SMEs, and they should make available to themselves. But really having a look at trying to streamline and automate and integrate as much of that data as possible to simplify the process there. But I was thinking, just practically, and 𝗏𝗏, I'll start with you here. Where do organizations overcomplicate carbon data collection?
So how do they,
Where do
why?
they overcomplicate it, or is it where are the opportunities for them to make it a little bit more simple?
Yeah, I think it's important really to get the whole organization on board, right? So then, because we work with different clients who collect data, ESG data, including carbon data in different manners, right? And I would say that actually one of the maybe a good practice is to adopt what we call a hub and spoke approach, right? So that means we would say as consultants, we work with a ESG rep or team, right? And then they in turn would have reps in the regions or in the different functional departments who do the first cut in consolidating the data and checking the data as well, right? So then pretty much when the data is eventually hits the consolidated level, right, there's already one level of checks, right? So we think that this model is fairly efficient, right, if it's manually done. So, but I also think that so like now we also generally advise our clients to consider deploying some of these enterprise tools as well, because we think that very importantly it's good for data governance, right? So because if you have a process which is say Excel based, right? So creating an Excel spreadsheet in a shared drive and getting your colleagues to drop off the data, there's a very high risk of human errors, right? So whereas if you are able to automate some of these collection, right, and then the process is faster, and generally many of these ESG platforms, they also have built-in audit trail criteria and processes as well. So I think it's a lot more rigorous that way. Yeah. So, but I would say that, I mean, at the end of the day, after the data comes in, then it's also important to eyeball, right? And then, not only eyeball just for reporting, right? But really, if we think about it, I've also realized that ESG reporting also allows companies to collect a lot of data that otherwise it wouldn't have been collecting. Let's say waste data, for instance, right? So then it's also an opportunity for companies to look through, right? And then think about, oh, then you might actually see something, right? You might see a trend in terms of how, let's say, your certain types of waste have been going up, right? And then you can then look, maybe perhaps do a deep dive and understand, is there an opportunity to optimize your business? Yeah.
Great. Thanks, 𝗏𝗏. Casey and Elizabeth, as you do assurance work and you're accredited in this space, do these sorts of tools simplify it for you? I'm just even thinking with some of the clients recently that have made this shift from spreadsheet based, even just the fact that you've got a regularly updated emissions factors library, so that when you come to assurance and verification, you can see the calculation methodology clearly and know that it's referencing the right source. What are you seeing there when it comes to assurance and the data that's coming through?
Okay, I think there are two again. I think maybe perspective to this, depending on the objective and the reporting requirements. So if you are looking at just getting ready for your scope 1 and 2 emissions to be audited by next year, for financial year ended 2027, for those companies that have to get scope 1 and scope 2 audited, I think that's rather a lot more straightforward, right? So you just need a tool. Basically, you can have it in Excel, or I think it's okay to maintain it in Excel, right? I mean, just to gather the information, data, and then use the conversion factors to convert, say, your purchased electricity, scope 2, to carbon emission. I think that's rather straightforward. And then of course, then that will be subject to audit. So you just have to support that with your electricity bills and some other documents. I think that for companies that are just looking at that, I think just a simple I think easy to use software is good enough, right? So of course, I think if it's just one entity, is you may not even need a software. But we are looking at maybe a region, or if you have global operations over 10 countries, each country you have another 5 subsidiaries, then I think that's when you need to consider using some, ESG reporting software or data capture software that the end user can just upload the information straight away, and you just have the carbon emissions being consolidated at the head office for ease of reporting, right? So that's more for just getting ready for Scope 1 and Scope 2 to be audited. I think the other aspect is, of course, if you are looking at really more intelligent softwares to help develop the entire sustainability report. So I think then companies would have to really consider a few things. Of course, number one, is the software aligned with the reporting framework? It could be GRI, TCFD, S1, and S2. So there are some softwares out there that really do not make any reference or benchmark to these reporting requirements, and then you could end up doing things that are not compliant with the regulatory or standards or requirements. So I think that's one. And number two is also I think to be looking out for software that have the AI functionality features that allow you to do some drafting of strategies, benchmarking against similar companies in the industry. So that's scalable, that you can use it to help you in your actual drafting. Because I think a lot of companies, they don't have problems with the data. Scope 1, Scope 2 emission calculation, that's simple, but it's more on the, as I mentioned earlier, the strategies and even climate resilience part of it, where they need to perform the climate sensitivity scenario analysis, right, based on your RCP 2.6 to RCP, I think the highest is 8.5, right, or something, right? So I think you need some form of AI capabilities in the software to help you perform all this more complicated analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we often find is that, it gets quite complicated when you get into Scope 3. If you're measuring that, then you move from data collection, and to your point, the automation, and then the tool functionality that helps you with, modeling, scenario modeling, target analysis, all of those types of things is useful. We won't spend long here, but just so the audience is aware that the Singaporean government is really exceptional in terms of its support from sustainability grants perspective, and there'll be ones that apply for different contexts there. Our job today isn't to go through them in detail, but would encourage you to reach out to us if you want assistance at all in terms of navigating those for your organization. There's some good grants available out there to prepare. We haven't had any other questions come through, but feel free if there's any other questions. We are getting close to the end of the webinar. We can continue the conversation offline as well. So we'll send all of our details and the details of the speakers so that we can connect, and you can ask questions afterwards there as well. So to the panel, any last thoughts that you might share before we close in the next minute?
Yeah, maybe if I just a quick comment. Joe, you're saying that about 50-60% of the participants are saying that they are doing this for compliance. Yeah. So is that right? Is that what the poll says?
Yeah, the majority were interested in learning about it because of regulatory requirements and reporting perspective.
Yeah. So then, and we have many clients. In fact, the bulk of our reporting clients are listed companies, right? And then it's a requirement for them. And usually our kind of advice to them is that while it's a requirement, right, it's certainly a starting point, but it should never be the ending point.
No.
Right. So because at the end of the day, you have invested your resources, whether you outsource or you insource, it's time and money, right? And you've created really a rich repository of insights about your business, data and insights, right? So then it's actually, it doesn't take a lot of effort to really take a look at that right? And then think about how you can make use of all that information to improve your business, right? So minimally, for instance, like one of the common feedback we get is that our question is that, oh, who reads the sustainability reports, right? So because they are getting thicker, so then what we advise our clients to do is that yes, some of the longer reports are quite intimidating. So then we always advise them, then maybe what you can do is to break it down, right? And then perhaps add a human interest angle, and then put it out there, right, as kind of as really part of your corporate communication strategy, right? So and then that way, I think it helps you in your branding, right? It also helps you potentially to position yourself as a choice employer. So this is one example, right? One small example of how reporting should never be the only ending journey, right? So it shouldn't be the only, or compliance shouldn't be the only reason why you would want to invest in reporting.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end today's session on. A big thank you to the three of you for joining us for such a a good detailed discussion, a practical discussion as well. And so I've left there on the screen for those that want to access the tools and resources page. There's a QR code there that you can go and start downloading those. The recording will be available, obviously, a little bit later, and we'll follow up just with an email so you've got these details in your inbox. Thank you again to 𝗏𝗏, to Casey and Elizabeth. Greatly appreciate your time today. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.